Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of The Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 5th of April. So coming to the first article, outer clarity. Now the context here is that recently ISRO, that is on the 1st of April, ISRO launched through its PSLV C45 has launched a launch that has taken place, and it has put 29 satellites in 3 different orbits. Also, this is in the context of the recent mission Shakti. This is an article on India's space policy, and that is why India's space program, and that is why it is a very, very important one. Coming to the issues which have been discussed, the first issue is with regards to a remarkable feat. Now, this is with regards to the multitasking and the mission accomplished that has been accomplished here, as well as the timing of the PSLV. The PSLV is what is known as the workhorse of the ISRO. So, in that context, you should know that the PSLV has achieved several remarkable feats, and this is another one to that. Next, what has been talked about here is the Indian space program. Now, under this, what is important is that a giant leap is what has been taken under the Indian space program. This is primarily after the mission Shakti, where anti-satellite missile is what was tested by the DRDO. So that is something that is important here. Also, some other satellites, for example, the Cartosat 2 series of satellite is what has been launched. Also the PSLV C45 launch that we've just talked about. Then the EMISAT, which is an electronic intelligence satellite. Also satellites that are targeting the strength of the defense dimension in India are what are being launched by India. So this is something that is important vis-a-vis India's space program, which is on a rise. Next, the editorial is discussing about the doctrinal aspects of India's space program. Now, what is here being talked about is that there is a need for a doctrine of our space program. At present, India does not have a written doctrine. So, a need for a doctrine is what is being felt, which should mention about our peaceful intention and also talk about our deterrence capabilities. This should be done to prevent any wrong inferences being drawn in a crisis situation. So this is something that has been advocated, and this is something that we can replicate in our answers. Another thing that the editorial is talking about is the need for a global regulatory regime. At present, there is no global regulatory regime. We had also discussed that this is primarily because US is unwilling to participate in a global regulatory regime. This is largely required now in the present time because of the growing militarization in space by different countries. So definitely a regime is going to be required. There's also a mention of the UN Disarmament Commission, where India had raised this issue, and the UN Disarmament Commission should lead in the cause for a regulatory regime, or for that matter disarmament of the space. Another issue which has been discussed here, which is similar, is the regulatory vacuum. So obviously if there is no regime, there is a regulatory vacuum, and this should prompt nations to develop deterrence. So this is one problem that is happening, is that because there is no regulation in space, countries like India are getting insinuated or are getting pressurized to develop deterrence in space arena, and as a result of which weaponization of the space or militarization of space is something that is increasing. If there is regulation of space, then countries will not feel pressurized to increase their power or military presence in space, is what has been highlighted. Another thing that the editorial is calling for is India's lead. The editorial is suggesting that India can take a lead here in forging a global and legally binding instrument to prevent the militarization of space. So this is something that you can repeat in your answers, that India has an opportunity to play a leadership role here. Another thing that is important here is the cost intensiveness of space program. Now, obviously, this is a very, very cost intensive program, and for countries which are developing like India, the cost is something that becomes very high. So if in such a scenario, if a regulation is what is maintained, there is demilitarization of space, then the pressure of spending on space programs is something that is going to be reduced for countries like India, especially for defense purposes. See, usage of space is good if it is for development purposes, but when usage of space is happening for militarization, then that is what is a cause of concern. And if cost is what is reduced here, then cost saving can be done, and that could be spent on welfare activities. So that is another perspective which has been discussed in the editorial. Space program, space militarization is going to be one of the most important topics for internal security this year, and that is also the relevance of this particular article. Coming to the next article, jobs or doles, which is the way forward. Now this is basically an interview, but some important points is what we can extract from this interview. So that is why I picked it up for discussion. Now coming to the context here is with regards to the Nyuntam Aay Yojana. Now you should know that this Nyuntam Aay Yojana is actually not a scheme, but rather it is a proposed scheme. The Congress in its election manifesto has said that it is, if brought to power, It is going to introduce a scheme which will be known as Nyay or the Nyuntam Aay Yojana. Under the scheme, it is envisaged that rupees 6,000 is what is going to be given every month to the poorest of the country, and this is going to include 20% of the households. So this brings into question the importance of direct benefits transfer, social security schemes, and in that context, this interview is what is important. Now, the first issue that has been discussed here is with regards to employment creation versus direct transfers. Now, this is a question, this is a perennial question, that should the government go in for direct transfers like these 6,000 rupees as an unemployment allowance, or should the government focus on employment creation? So the answer that has been given in this interview is that definitely long-term solution is to create employment. Only then can employment only then can poverty be something that can be eliminated, only if employment is what is generated. But what needs to be considered here is that the focus is on organized employment, which at present is only 10%, and 90% of the employment in India is unorganized. So the issue is that the focus of people or the citizens are demanding for more and more organized employment. So in order to bring this 90% into the fold of organized employment is going to be a huge task. And till this time, this task is to be completed. Until that time, it is important that direct transfers be preferred, so that at least some social security or social protection is what is available to the citizens. Especially this is required in the scenario of huge risks that are prevalent in the environment at present. For instance, workers are exposed to health risks, they are exposed to financial risks, they are exposed to labor market risks. So in this backdrop, what is required is that some degree of protection in the form of social security schemes is also what is maintained, because this process of organized employment creation is something that is a long drawn one. So that is the first analysis which we can draw from this particular article. The second issue is of the issue of working poor. Now what here the interview is brought to light that the major problem in India is not that only that there is unemployment. Another major problem is that the people who are working also are being paid very less, and this is largely because they are working in the unorganized sector. So focus has to be on creating an environment for increasing the incomes of people who are already employed, and only then can true benefits in the economy be reaped. So that is one analysis. Next, an analysis is on the scheme Mahendra, which is a very, very important analysis. Now here the interview is discussing that Mahendra is basically a self-targeted program, because a person has to enroll for a job in Mahendra, and only such a person will enroll for a job who is actually in need of that money. So definitely this is a type of self-targeting. Here the government does not have to go and look for the poor. Rather the poor will themselves come to the government looking for employment. So this is better than all the other programs, because in this direct transfer program also that is being envisaged, that is the Nyay scheme, definitely there is a high risk of targeting errors. Some people who are not deserving are going to get included, and those who are very much deserving might get excluded. So a model of Mahendra is something that has been appreciated. So that is one analysis. Another thing that has been discussed here is the issue of opportunity cost. Now the editorial is saying that for a scheme like this direct benefit transfer scheme will require money to the tune of 3 lakh crore. So this is a huge amount of money that is to be invested for a scheme like this. Now whenever such kind of a scheme is what is launched, for instance even Mahendra, what happens is that an issue is what is raised of opportunity cost. What is often said here is that this money is what could be invested for some other purposes. For instance, this money could be invested in education and health sector. Even the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, had himself raised questions on Mahendra, and he had said that instead this money is what should be invested in these other areas. So this is what has been called as an opportunity cost, and the editorial is saying that whenever such kind of welfare schemes are what are to be introduced, this opportunity cost or this tough decision is what every government has to only take. So that is one analysis. Another thing which has been discussed here is with regards to taxing and redistribution. Now obviously if this money is, the sum is very high, so some resources for this is what is going to be required, and the resource for this is taxation itself. So the editorial here is discussing that is it fair to actually tax the rich and then redistribute that money? And if you are taxing the rich, then what happens is that it has impacts on the economy, because then the economy gets impacted and more businesses will move out of India. So India cannot be a country which is highly taxing also, because in the long run, if businesses are not going to be developing in India or not generating in India, then this is again going to lead to less employment creation, and a vicious cycle is what is going to be set up. So some degree of taxation is what is acceptable, but how to generate resources without excessively taxing the masses. Here an analysis of corporate tax is also what has been talked about, that the government is reducing corporate tax now to the tune of 24%. So in that light also resources are going to reduce is what has been discussed. Another issue is that of mapping the dynamic poor. Now obviously if such kind of targeting is what is going to be required, then it is going to be important that the government maps or the government is well aware about the poor in the country. So for this the editorial is advocating that what the government should do is that the government should come up with some sort of a census for mapping the poor. For instance, the socio-economic caste census of the year 2011 is something that could be used for mapping the poor, but definitely in the year 2019 a lot has changed. So some newer methods of mapping the poor is what is going to be required. So that is one analysis which has been drawn. Another issue which has been discussed here is with regards to the social protection and social safety net. Now social protection is the direct benefit transfer which is being envisaged. This, the editorial is saying, is something that is important, especially for the old, the disabled, the more vulnerable, like women. Maternity benefits are what are required. And social safety net is like a scheme like Mahendra, which provides an opportunity for the poor to come and get themselves enrolled and work under Mahendra if they need the money. And if they are out of the poverty net, then automatically they will not require this safety net. So this is something that has been analyzed in the editorial, that in India, a mix of these two schemes is the most successful model, because those who are poor and who can work will come under the social safety nets, and those who are vulnerable, like the old age women as well as the disabled, they can get social protection, which is very much warranted and very much required. So these are some ideas that we have generated from this particular article, and these ideas can be used in several answers depending upon their utility. So that is going to be the relevance of this particular discussion. And these are the only two articles for today. Before we end, please take a look at our programs. We are starting a prelims batch from the 20th of April, and we have an ongoing Karnataka Administrative Services batch. For those of you who are interested, please contact us. And that's all for our discussion today. I thank you all for watching the video.